When billionaire tech CEO Marcus Chen sees his best friend's marriage crumble due to greed, a seed of doubt takes root in his mind about his own wife, Sophie. A simple kindergarten teacher with a heart of gold. Could her love be as pure as it seems? His decision to test her loyalty spirals into an elaborate deception that not only threatens their marriage but impacts an entire community. Sometimes the greatest test of character lies not in being tested, but in doing the testing. Marcus Chen had everything a man could dream of: a successful tech company valued at billions, multiple properties across the globe, and a garage full of luxury cars that would make any collector envious. But at 42, what he valued most was his marriage to Sophie, a kindergarten teacher he'd met at a local coffee shop 5 years ago. Their love story had been simple, pure. Sophie had no idea about his wealth when they first met. He'd told her he worked in tech, keeping the details vague. She'd fallen for his personality, his humor, his kindness. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes and cared for her students made him feel like the richest man alive, even before his company's IPO doubled his net worth. But lately, doubt had been gnawing at Marcus's mind. His best friend and business partner, James, had recently gone through a bitter divorce after discovering his wife had only stayed with him for his money. The experience had left James bitter and suspicious of all relationships. "How can you be sure Sophie's different?" James would ask during their late-night drinks. "She's a teacher, Marcus. Do you really think she'd have married you if she knew you were worth nothing?" Marcus always defended Sophie, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. He started noticing little things he'd overlooked before: how Sophie's eyes would linger on luxury car advertisements, how she'd sigh while browsing high-end fashion magazines, how she'd mention her friends' vacation homes with a hint of longing in her voice. One evening, after another conversation with James, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would test Sophie's loyalty. The plan was elaborate. He would gradually convince her that his company was failing, that they were losing everything. He would observe how she reacted, how she treated him when she thought they were headed for bankruptcy. The deception began subtly. Marcus started coming home later, his shoulders slumped, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by worried frowns. Sophie noticed immediately. "Is everything okay, love?" she asked one night, massaging his tense shoulders. "Just some problems at work," he replied, avoiding her concerned gaze. "The market's not looking good." Over the next few weeks, Marcus orchestrated his company's fictional downfall. He sold his Ferrari, claiming they needed the money to keep the business afloat. He canceled their planned vacation to the Maldives. He even started bringing home grocery store brand items instead of their usual organic produce. Sophie's reaction wasn't what he expected. Instead of pulling away, she drew closer. When he sold the Ferrari, she suggested they spend their weekends going on hiking adventures instead. When he canceled their vacation, she transformed their backyard into a tropical paradise, complete with tiki torches and a kiddie pool. She started cooking more elaborate meals at home, saying she'd always wanted to perfect her culinary skills. But Marcus couldn't trust these reactions. Was she just being clever, playing the long game? James's words echoed in his head. "Women like that are master manipulators, Marcus. They'll weather any storm if they think there's gold at the end of the rainbow." The deception deepened. Marcus told Sophie they needed to sell their house, their dream home with the gourmet kitchen she loved so much. He expected tears, accusations, perhaps even the first signs of her true nature emerging. Instead, Sophie spent an evening researching smaller homes in good school districts. "Look at this one," she said excitedly, showing him a modest 3-bedroom house. "It's close to my school, and it has a small garden where we could grow our own vegetables. Think of how much we could save." Marcus watched her planning their downsized life with growing confusion. She seemed almost happier. She spoke about the challenge of living on a budget as if it were an adventure they were embarking on together. She even started a spreadsheet to track their expenses, cutting out her own luxuries without him having to ask. The situation became more complex when Sophie's wealthy cousin, Derek, came to visit. Derek had always had a thinly veiled crush on Sophie, and now he arrived driving a brand new Porsche, fresh from his successful startup's buyout. "I heard about the company's troubles," Derek said during dinner, his eyes fixed on Sophie. "You know, I'm always looking for talented teachers for my education technology division. The salary would be substantial." Marcus felt his heart stop as he waited for Sophie's response. This was it, the perfect escape route for a gold digger looking to trade up. But Sophie just smiled politely and shook her head. "I love my kindergartners too much," she said simply. "But thank you for thinking of me." That night, after Derek left, Sophie found Marcus sitting alone in their darkened living room, staring at nothing. She sat beside him and took his hand. "We're going to be okay, you know," she said softly. "Money comes and goes, but we have each other. Remember what you told me on our first date? That success isn't about what you own, but about who you become along the way. Well, I married that man, not his bank account." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. The test had revealed something, but not what he'd expected. While he'd been obsessing over Sophie's loyalty, she'd been proving something far more valuable: her character. The deception continued to spiral, taking on a life of its own. Friends started treating them differently. Invitations to social events became rare. Sophie's friends whispered behind her back, wondering why she stayed with a failing entrepreneur when she could easily trade up. Through it all, Sophie remained his rock. She started a small side business giving piano lessons to supplement their income. She sold her designer handbags without him asking, using the money to pay for what she thought were overdue company bills. She never complained, never blamed him, never showed anything but determination to face their challenges together. One Sunday morning, Marcus found her in their garden, clothes stained with dirt as she planted vegetables. She looked up at him with soil on her cheek and smiled so brightly it hurt his heart. "I got these seedlings on sale," she said proudly. "In a few months, we'll have our own organic produce again. And look," she pointed to a small greenhouse she'd constructed from old windows and reclaimed materials. "Derek thought I was crazy when I asked him to help me collect these from construction sites, but it's perfect, isn't it?" Marcus watched his wife, this woman who had chosen to build rather than blame, to create rather than criticize, to love rather than leave, and felt the weight of his deception like a physical pain in his chest. The truth needed to come out, but the consequences seemed more terrifying than ever. How would Sophie react when she learned it had all been a test? Would she be able to forgive him for doubting her? And even if she did, would their relationship ever recover from such a breach of trust? His phone buzzed with a message from James. "You've proven your point. She's either the world's best actress or the real deal. Time to end the experiment." Marcus stared at his wife, happily tending to her makeshift garden, and realized he'd never felt more unsure about anything in his life. The test had worked, but was he ready to face the results? The deception had taken on a life of its own, spinning an intricate web that now seemed impossible to unravel without destroying everything in the process. Each day that passed added another layer of complexity to the situation, another reason why revealing the truth would be devastating. Sophie had recently started organizing financial literacy workshops for other teachers, sharing the budgeting skills she'd developed during their supposed downturn. She'd become an inspiration to others facing economic hardships, all while living a life that was based on a lie. The weight of the truth pressed harder on Marcus with each passing day, threatening to crush him under its burden. He watched as Sophie transformed their challenges into opportunities, their setbacks into stepping stones, and their supposed poverty into a testament of love. What had started as a simple test of loyalty had evolved into something far more complex and devastating. The real test, it seemed, wasn't of Sophie's character. It was of his own. As autumn approached, Marcus found himself drowning in the consequences of his deception. Sophie had taken on additional piano students, teaching late into the evening after her kindergarten classes. Her dedication was admirable, but it filled him with shame to watch her exhaust herself for a financial crisis that didn't exist. Their social circle had shifted dramatically. The wealthy couples they used to dine with had largely disappeared, replaced by a new community of modest means, but genuine hearts. Sophie had started a neighborhood cooperative where families shared resources and skills. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door taught them authentic Mexican cooking, while Sophie offered piano lessons to her children in exchange. The situation became even more complicated when Sophie's parents offered to sell their retirement home to help Marcus's company stay afloat. Her father, a retired accountant, had tears in his eyes as he made the offer over Sunday dinner. "You're family now, Marcus," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can't just stand by and watch you lose everything you've worked for. Marcus had to excuse himself from the table, barely making it to the bathroom before emptying the contents of his stomach. The web of lies had grown far beyond testing Sophie's loyalty. It was now affecting entire families, communities, relationships. James, who had started this whole scheme with his cynical warnings, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "This has gone too far," he told Marcus during a clandestine meeting at their usual bar. "You're not just testing her anymore. You're watching her become a better person while you become a worse one." The truth of those words stung, but Marcus felt trapped in his own deception. Every day Sophie showed him new depths of her character that made the eventual revelation more terrifying. She'd started volunteering at a homeless shelter, saying their own financial struggles had opened her eyes to how quickly life could change. One evening, she came home excited about a new opportunity. A wealthy parent of one of her kindergarten students had offered her a position as a private tutor for triple her current salary. The job would require long hours and less time with her other students, but the money would help their situation significantly. "I turned it down," she told Marcus over their simple dinner of homemade soup and bread. "Money's tight, I know, but those kids at school need me. We'll figure something else out." Marcus watched her eat her soup, proudly explaining how she'd managed to make it from scratch for less than $5, and felt like the smallest person in the world. Here was his wife, choosing love over money, community over comfort, integrity over opportunity, all while he orchestrated an elaborate lie to test her character. The situation reached a new level of complexity when Sophie discovered she was pregnant. She found out during a routine checkup and kept the news to herself for 3 days, trying to figure out how to tell him, given their financial situation. When she finally shared the news, her eyes were filled with both joy and concern. "I know the timing isn't ideal," she said, touching her still flat stomach. "But maybe this is the universe telling us that wealth isn't just about money. We're rich in all the ways that matter." Marcus spent that night in his home office, supposedly working late, but actually fighting an internal battle. The pregnancy changed everything. How could he continue this charade knowing his child would be born into a web of lies? But how could he reveal the truth now, when Sophie was vulnerable and needed stability more than ever? The next blow came when Sophie's sister, Lisa, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Lisa had been saving for treatment, but now she offered her savings to Marcus's company instead. "Sophie loves you so much," Lisa said during a phone call. "And family helps family. We'll figure out my treatment options later." Marcus immediately declined, fabricating a story about securing last-minute investors. But the damage was done. His lies weren't just testing Sophie anymore. They were actively harming the people she loved. Meanwhile, Sophie had started writing a blog about finding happiness during financial hardship. Her authentic, heartfelt posts about their journey had garnered a following, with readers finding hope and inspiration in their story. She was inadvertently building a community around a lie, touching lives with her genuine belief in love's power to overcome adversity. The pregnancy progressed, and Sophie threw herself into preparing for the baby with characteristic resourcefulness. She organized a skill swap group where expecting mothers traded baby items and shared knowledge. She learned to knit, spending evenings creating tiny garments while telling Marcus how lucky their child was to be born into a family rich with love. Each act of love, each demonstration of character, each sacrifice made in the name of their partnership became another brick in the wall of Marcus's guilt. The truth needed to come out, but the potential damage seemed to grow exponentially with each passing day. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a free entertainment Sophie had come to cherish, she placed his hand on her growing belly and whispered, "Feel that? The baby's kicking. I think he knows his daddy's here." Marcus felt the gentle movement beneath his palm and realized with crushing clarity that his deception had now touched an innocent life. His child would enter the world either under false pretenses or in the aftermath of a devastating revelation. The complexity of his situation had evolved far beyond a simple test of loyalty. It had become a moral maze where every turn led to potential devastation. The truth would hurt Sophie deeply, but continuing the lie threatened to corrupt everything pure and beautiful about their relationship. What had started as a doubt about his wife's character had transformed into an undeniable testament to it, and an equally undeniable indictment of his own. As Sophie's pregnancy progressed and their community grew stronger through what everyone believed were hard times, Marcus found himself facing the most difficult question of all. In trying to test his wife's integrity, had he irreparably compromised his own? The situation reached a breaking point during Sophie's baby shower. Their modest backyard was filled with people whose lives had intertwined with theirs during their supposed financial downturn. Rather than expensive gifts, guests brought handmade treasures and promises of help. Mrs. Rodriguez would cook meals after the birth. Lisa, who had delayed her cancer treatments, would help with child care, and Sophie's piano students had collaborated on a lullaby composition. During the celebration, Derek arrived uninvited, carrying an expensive designer diaper bag and a thinly veiled agenda. He pulled Marcus aside, ostensibly to discuss business. "I've been watching you destroy Sophie's life for months now," Derek said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "I've had my accountant look into your company. Something doesn't add up, Marcus. Either you're lying about the financial troubles or you're hiding something worse." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Derek had always been clever with numbers, and his resources were substantial. The threat of exposure loomed larger than ever, but not in the way Marcus had anticipated. Instead of revealing his wealth, Derek was close to uncovering the elaborate deception itself. "I'm giving you 1 week," Derek continued, sipping his drink casually. "Either you come clean to Sophie, or I'll do it for you. And believe me, my version won't be kind." The ultimatum sent Marcus into a panic spiral. That night, after the guests had left and Sophie had fallen asleep surrounded by handmade baby blankets and secondhand toys, he drove to James's house. His friend took one look at his face and poured them both a drink. "Derek knows," Marcus said, his hands shaking. "Or at least he suspects. I have to tell her, James. I have to tell her everything." James, who had watched the deception spiral out of control with growing unease, leaned back in his chair. "You know what's ironic? You started this whole thing because you thought Sophie might be dishonest about loving you. Now you're the one who's been dishonest about everything." The truth of those words hit Marcus like a physical blow. But the complications had grown beyond his personal moral crisis. Sophie's blog about finding joy in financial hardship had gained national attention. A publishing house had reached out about turning her posts into a book. She was becoming a voice for resilience and authenticity, all while unknowingly living a lie. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety. Marcus watched Sophie prepare for their baby's arrival with her characteristic optimism, each loving gesture another twist of the knife in his gut. She had started painting the nursery herself, using leftover paint from neighbors and creating whimsical murals that made up in heart what they lacked in professional polish. "See this?" she said, pointing to a slightly wobbly star. "It's not perfect, but it's made with love. That's what I want our child to learn. That perfection isn't about having everything, it's about making something beautiful with what you have." The irony of her words wasn't lost on Marcus. While she created beauty from perceived scarcity, he sat on a fortune that could have made her life easier, all because of a test that had spiraled out of control. As Derek's deadline approached, the pressure became unbearable. Sophie's sister Lisa's condition had worsened, likely due to delaying her treatment. Sophie spent hours on the phone with her, strategizing about medical payment plans and alternative treatments, unaware that her husband could have paid for the best oncologists in the world with what amounted to pocket change for him. The deception had grown so large that it now felt like a living entity, consuming everything in its path. It had started with a simple question about love and money, but it had evolved into something far more insidious. Marcus wasn't just testing Sophie's loyalty anymore. He was actively betraying the incredible person she had proven herself to be. One evening, while Sophie was at her last piano lesson of the day, Marcus sat in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of their simplified life, the handmade curtains, the carefully tended garden visible through the window, the collection of jars filled with coins they were supposedly saving for the baby's future. Each item represented not their poverty, but Sophie's resilience, creativity, and unwavering love. His phone buzzed with a text from Derek. 3 days left. Tick-tock. In the nursery, the wobbly star Sophie had painted seemed to mock him. She had created something beautiful from nothing, while he had created nothing from everything. The contrast between their characters had never been more stark. The question was no longer about how Sophie would react to learning about their true financial situation. It had become about whether their relationship could survive the revelation of such a fundamental breach of trust. How could she ever believe anything he said again? How could she trust a man who had orchestrated such an elaborate deception while she poured her heart into making their supposedly difficult life beautiful? As he heard Sophie's key in the lock, returning from her piano lesson, Marcus realized he was out of time. The truth needed to come out, but would it set them free or destroy everything they had built together? The answer to that question terrified him more than any financial test ever could. Sophie entered their modest home with her usual warm smile, though Marcus could see the fatigue in her eyes. At 6 months pregnant, teaching kindergarten and giving piano lessons was taking its toll, but she never complained. She carried a small box of leftovers from one of her students' parents. "Mrs. Kim made too much kimchi," she said, placing the box in their refrigerator. "She says it's good for the baby. Isn't it amazing how everyone takes care of us?" Her words were like arrows to Marcus's heart. The community they'd built, the relationships they'd formed, all of it was founded on a lie that was about to explode. Derek's deadline loomed just days away, and the weight of the truth felt like it was crushing Marcus's chest. The situation became even more complicated when Sophie's blog caught the attention of a major news network. They wanted to interview her about finding happiness during financial hardship, to showcase her as an inspiration for others struggling in tough economic times. The producer's email spoke of her authentic voice and genuine spirit, words that made Marcus feel physically ill. That same evening, James called with worse news. "The business press is starting to ask questions," he said, his voice tense. "Someone's been digging into the company's financials. I think Derek's making moves, Marcus. We can't keep this contained much longer." Sophie noticed Marcus's distraction during dinner, reaching across their small table to touch his hand. "Is everything okay? You've seemed worried lately. More than usual, I mean." There was so much love and concern in her eyes that Marcus almost broke down right there. But the words stuck in his throat as he looked around their home. Every corner held evidence of Sophie's determination to create joy, despite what she thought were difficult circumstances. The handmade baby mobile hanging in the nursery, the carefully tended herb garden in recycled containers, the piano in the corner where she taught students, its worn keys testament to the hours she spent helping others make music. The next morning brought another complication. Sophie's sister Lisa called, crying. Her cancer had progressed, and the doctors were pushing for immediate treatment. She'd found a clinical trial that might help, but it required a substantial deposit. "I just needed you to know why I might not be able to help much with the baby," Lisa told Sophie. "I have to focus on the treatment now." Marcus overheard Sophie reassuring her sister, promising to figure something out. After the call, she sat at their kitchen table with their budget spreadsheet, moving numbers around with determined focus, trying to find money that didn't exist, while Marcus sat on millions that could save her sister's life. The irony of the situation had become almost unbearable. His test of Sophie's character had revealed nothing about her and everything about himself. While she had responded to supposed adversity with grace, creativity, and unflagging love, he had hidden behind a web of lies that grew more constrictive each day. Derek's texts became more frequent and threatening. The business press continued to dig. The TV producer kept calling about the interview. Each ring of Marcus's phone could be the one that brought everything crashing down. Sophie, meanwhile, continued to bloom despite what she thought were difficult circumstances. She organized a fundraising concert with her piano students to help with Lisa's medical bills. She wrote blog posts about finding strength in community and joy in simplicity. She spent evenings working on the baby's room, creating art from found objects and secondhand treasures. One night, she showed Marcus a blanket she'd been working on, pieced together from meaningful scraps of fabric. A piece of her wedding dress, one of his old ties, material from her teaching apron. "See," she said, running her hands over the uneven stitches. "It's not perfect, but it tells our story. How we faced challenges together and came out stronger." Marcus stared at the blanket, each loving stitch another reminder of his deception. Their story wasn't about facing challenges together. It was about Sophie facing artificial challenges alone, while he watched from behind a curtain of lies. The breaking point came when Sophie's blog post about community support during tough times went viral. Thousands of comments poured in from people sharing their own stories of resilience, thanking Sophie for giving them hope. Major newspapers wanted to interview her. a charitable foundation reached out about making her a spokesperson for their financial literacy program. "Can you believe it?" Sophie said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "All this good coming from our struggles? Sometimes I think losing everything was the best thing that could have happened to us. It showed us what really matters." Marcus felt the walls closing in. The truth was going to come out one way or another. Derek's deadline was nearly up. The business press was circling. The weight of social media attention meant any revelation would be public and devastating. But as he watched Sophie fold the handmade blanket with careful hands, her pregnancy bump obvious under her thrift store dress, he realized the most devastating part wasn't going to be the public exposure. It would be the moment this amazing woman, who had turned hardship into harmony, discovered that while she had been creating beauty from nothing, her husband had been creating lies from everything. The morning of Derek's deadline dawned cold and gray. Marcus hadn't slept, spending the night watching Sophie breathe peacefully beside him, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. The baby had been active lately, as if sensing the mounting tension in their household. His phone vibrated with a final message from Derek. "Time's up. I'm meeting Sophie for lunch today. Last chance to do this your way." Marcus knew Sophie had the lunch planned. She'd mentioned meeting Derek to discuss a potential donation for Lisa's medical fund. The irony was suffocating. His wife was going to ask for help from the very person about to destroy their marriage. The morning unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Sophie hummed while getting ready for school, pausing occasionally to rub her back. Pregnancy was taking its toll, but she remained positive, even as she packed her simple lunch in reused containers. "I have a good feeling about today," she said, kissing him goodbye. Derek seemed really interested in helping with Lisa's treatment. Maybe things are finally turning around for us. As soon as she left, Marcus called James in a panic. His friend's voice was grave. "It's worse than we thought," James said. "Someone leaked documents to the press. Your company's latest earnings report is going public today. There's no hiding the success anymore. The story of the struggling tech CEO worth billions is going to break this afternoon." Marcus's hands began to shake. He'd planned to talk to Sophie before her lunch with Derek, but now everything was spiraling out of his control. The story would break while she was sitting across from her cousin, who already had his own suspicions about Marcus's deception. The media frenzy began mid-morning. Marcus's phone exploded with notifications as the story spread across financial news networks. His company's PR team was scrambling to respond, but the personal angle was what caught everyone's attention. Social media was already connecting the dots between the billionaire CEO and his wife's viral blog about living on a budget. Sophie's latest blog post, published just that morning, was about finding joy in simple pleasures during hard times. The comment section quickly filled with a mix of confusion, anger, and accusations. Her authenticity, the very thing that had drawn people to her story, was being questioned by thousands of strangers who didn't know the full truth. Marcus tried calling Sophie, but her phone went straight to voicemail. She always turned it off during class. He could picture her now, sitting cross-legged on the reading carpet with her kindergartners, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. The press had begun gathering outside their modest home. Through the window, Marcus could see photographers capturing images of their carefully tended vegetable garden, the second-hand car in the driveway, all the physical evidence of their supposed financial struggles. Lisa called in tears. She'd seen the news and couldn't understand why her brother-in-law had let her delay cancer treatment when he could have paid for it many times over. Her voice was a mixture of confusion, hurt, and growing anger. "Does Sophie know?" she kept asking. "Please tell me Sophie already knows." But Sophie didn't know. She was walking into lunch with Derek at that very moment, about to face a truth that would rewrite their entire relationship. Marcus grabbed his keys, knowing he had to get to the restaurant before Derek could deliver his version of events. As he rushed to his car, dodging reporters, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sophie, sent during her lunch break before meeting Derek. "Just felt the baby kick during story time. Can't wait to tell you all about it tonight. I love you. We're so blessed, even with all our challenges." Marcus sat in his car, staring at the message as photographers' flashes went off around him. In trying to test his wife's loyalty, he had created a situation that would test something far more fundamental: her capacity for forgiveness. The drive to the restaurant felt like the longest of his life. Traffic crawled as news alerts continued to pop up on his phone. The story was evolving, with business reporters digging deeper into the discrepancy between his company's public success and his wife's blog about financial hardship. Someone had already dubbed it the billionaire's deception. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the rearview mirror and barely recognized himself. How had he become this person? When had testing Sophie's character become more important than maintaining his own? As he pulled into the restaurant parking lot, he saw Sophie's sensible used car parked next to Derek's luxury SUV. Through the restaurant's window, he could see them already seated, Derek's expression serious as he reached for something in his briefcase. Marcus's hand shook as he reached for the door handle. In moments, his carefully constructed deception would collapse, and he would face the consequences of doubting the one person who had proven, over and over, that she was beyond doubt. Marcus burst through the restaurant doors just as Derek was sliding a folder across the table to Sophie. The lunch crowd turned to stare at the commotion, several people already pulling out their phones as they recognized him from the breaking news. "Sophie," he called out, his voice cracking. She looked up, her face still bright with the innocence of someone who didn't know their world was about to change. Derek's expression was grim, his hand still resting on the folder that contained what Marcus assumed was evidence of the deception. "Marcus? What's wrong?" "You're shaking," Sophie said, starting to rise from her chair. Her pregnancy made the movement awkward, and the sight of her struggling to stand sent another wave of guilt through him. "Don't get up," both men said simultaneously, moving to help her. She froze, looking between them with growing confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. "Derek was just about to show me something about Lisa's treatment options, but you both look like—" Her voice trailed off as she noticed the restaurant patrons openly filming them now. A reporter had somehow made it inside and was approaching their table with a microphone extended. "Mrs. Chen," the reporter called out, "how do you feel about your husband's company's recent success? Were you aware of his true net worth when you started your blog about financial hardship?" Sophie's face remained blank for a moment, then slowly transformed as understanding began to dawn. She looked at the folder on the table, then at Derek's face, and finally at Marcus, her eyes wide with confusion. "What success?" she whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, her phone began buzzing incessantly in her purse. The story had reached her network of blog readers, her students' parents, her fellow teachers. Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding so hard he could barely speak. "Sophie, please, let me explain. Not here, not like this." But Derek was already opening the folder, spreading out bank statements, company reports, and property deeds across the table. Sophie's hands trembled as she picked up a document showing Marcus's true net worth. The number had so many zeros that she blinked several times, as if trying to clear her vision. "All this time," she said, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's buzz, "the budget spreadsheets, Lisa's treatment, the baby's secondhand clothes." Her voice broke on the last word, and her hand moved to the worn fabric of her thrift store maternity dress, the dress she'd been so proud of finding on sale, that she'd carefully altered herself to make it last through her pregnancy. The reporter was still talking, asking questions about the viral blog posts, about the community Sophie had built around their supposed financial struggles. Each word seemed to hit her like a physical blow as the implications of Marcus's deception became clear. "Mrs. Chen, your story inspired thousands of people facing genuine financial hardship. What do you say to them now?" Sophie's face drained of color, her blog readers, the community she'd built, all those people who had shared their own stories of struggle, who had found hope in her experiences. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It had ripples that reached far beyond their marriage. Marcus reached for her hand, but she pulled away as if his touch burned. "The garden," she said suddenly. "The vegetables I've been growing, the piano lessons, the fundraising concert for Lisa." Each memory seemed to take on a new, twisted meaning as she processed the truth. Derek stood up, placing himself between Sophie and the growing crowd of onlookers. "She needs air," he announced firmly, but Sophie shook her head. "What I need," she said, her voice gaining strength even as tears filled her eyes, "is for someone to tell me why." She looked directly at Marcus. "Why would you watch me worry about Lisa's cancer treatment? Watch me work extra hours while pregnant? Watch me—" She stopped, placing both hands on her belly, as if to shield their unborn child from the truth. The restaurant had gone silent. dozens of phones recording what was quickly becoming a viral moment on top of an already viral story. Marcus knew whatever he said next would be broadcast across social media within minutes, analyzed and judged by countless strangers. But in that moment, looking at his wife's devastated face, the public spectacle didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the destruction he saw in her eyes, the slow crumbling of every belief she'd held about their marriage, about him, about the life they'd built together. "It started as a test," he began, the words feeling like glass in his throat. "I wanted to know if you truly loved me, or if—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Speaking it aloud, especially here, with Sophie looking at him as if he were a stranger, made the reasoning sound even more hollow than it had become in his own mind. Sophie's hand moved to her throat, finding the handmade necklace she wore, a gift from one of her kindergarten students' parents who made jewelry to supplement their income. Every detail of their life together was being rewritten in her mind, every genuine connection tainted by his deception. "A test?" Sophie's voice cracked on the word. "Our entire marriage was a test?" The restaurant had become unnaturally quiet, the only sounds coming from the soft clicks of phone cameras and the muffled sobs Sophie was trying to contain. A waiter hovered uncertainly nearby, holding menus like shields. "Not our marriage," Marcus pleaded, taking a step toward her. I let James get in my head. After his divorce, he said things about women and money, and I just wanted to be sure." "Sure of what?" Sophie's voice had taken on a strange, hollow quality. "Sure that I would love you if we were poor? Sure that I wouldn't leave you for someone like Derek?" She gestured at her cousin, who stood protectively beside her chair. "So, you watched me exhaust myself teaching extra lessons, watched me cry over Lisa's medical bills, watched me—" She stopped suddenly, her face contorting with a new realization. "The baby shower," she whispered. "All those women bringing handmade gifts because they thought we couldn't afford new ones. Mrs. Rodriguez making us extra meals because she worried I wasn't eating enough. They opened their hearts to us, shared what little they had, and it was all... Her hands began to shake so violently that Derek quickly pulled out a chair for her. The reporter had stopped asking questions, seeming to realize they were witnessing something too raw for public consumption. "Your blog readers," Derek said quietly. "They need to hear something from you. The story's already everywhere." Sophie pulled out her phone, and Marcus watched as her face crumpled reading the notifications. Hundreds of messages from her followers, people who had found hope in her stories of resilience, who had shared their own genuine struggles in her comments section. "How do I tell them?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How do I tell them it was all a lie? That while they were sharing their real pain, their real fights to survive, I was just playing poor?" "You weren't playing anything," Marcus said desperately. "Everything you did, everything you are, that's real, Sophie. The money doesn't change who you are." "Doesn't it?" She looked up at him, and the devastation in her eyes made him step back. "The money isn't what matters here, Marcus. It's the fact that you could have helped Lisa start her treatment months ago. You could have prevented Mrs. Rodriguez from sharing her family's food when they barely had enough. You could have just trusted me." Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her hands to her face. The baby chose that moment to kick, and Sophie let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Even our child," she said, her voice muffled behind her hands. "Their first experiences of the world, of their father, will be tangled up in this lie. The nursery I painted to save money, the second-hand clothes I've been collecting, the handmade blanket." She stopped again, overwhelmed. Marcus knelt beside her chair, desperate to make her understand. "I'll make it right. I'll pay back everyone who helped us, donate to their causes, set up a fund for Lisa's treatment." "You still don't understand," Sophie cut him off, lowering her hands to reveal eyes that had gone from hurt to angry. "You can't buy back integrity. You can't pay your way out of breaking people's trust. These people opened their hearts to us, shared their struggles, formed real bonds, and you let them. You watched them give from their own need, knowing you could have helped them instead." The truth of her words hit Marcus like physical blows. Every example she gave revealed another layer of his moral failure. This wasn't just about testing her loyalty anymore. It was about the web of genuine human connections his deception had corrupted. "Mrs. Chen, the reporter said softly, having found her humanity beneath her professional detachment. "Would you like us to stop recording?" Sophie straightened in her chair, one hand still protectively cradling her belly. "No," she said, her voice gaining strength. "People deserve to hear the truth. Every person who read my blog, who shared their story, who found hope in our supposed struggle, they deserve to know." She turned to Marcus, and her next words carried the weight of judgment, not just for him, but for everyone watching this scene unfold. "You tested my loyalty," Sophie said, her voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. "But in doing so, you proved your own disloyalty, not just to me, but to every person who became part of our lives during this experiment." She slowly pushed herself up from the chair, one hand steadying herself on the table. The restaurant patrons watched in respectful silence as she gathered her dignity around herself like a shield. "I'm going to my sister's," she announced, her voice trembling but determined. "She needs to start her treatment immediately. I assume you can arrange that now, since money is no object." Derek stepped forward to help her, but she held up her hand. "I need to write something first. My blog readers deserve an explanation, and it needs to come from me." With shaking fingers, she pulled out her phone and began to type. The clicks of her keyboard seemed to echo in the hushed restaurant. After a few minutes, she read aloud. "To everyone who shared their struggles, their hopes, and their hearts with me over these past months, I am deeply sorry. I just learned that our financial hardship was a deception orchestrated by my husband to test my character. Every word I wrote came from my heart, but the circumstances that inspired those words were built on lies. The strength and generosity you all showed us was real. The community we built together was real. The lessons about what truly matters in life are real. But I cannot continue this blog knowing its foundation was false. To those who shared your own struggles, you are the authentic ones. You are the true testament to human resilience, and you deserve better than what my silence enabled." She pressed post and looked up at Marcus with tears streaming down her face. "That's what integrity looks like," she said quietly. "That's what you should have trusted in from the beginning." The post went viral within minutes. Comments flooded in, some angry, some supportive of Sophie, all processing the shock of the revelation. The media coverage shifted from the billionaire's deception to his wife's dignified response. In the weeks that followed, Sophie channeled her pain into purpose. She established a foundation to help the families who had helped them, ensuring Mrs. Rodriguez's children got college scholarships and that every member of their community who had shared their resources received support in return. Lisa's treatment began immediately at the best cancer center in the country. The baby was born 3 months later, a healthy girl they named Faith, though Sophie handled the birth and early months largely on her own. Marcus was allowed to provide financial support, but had to earn back every other privilege of fatherhood. It took 2 years of counseling, genuine remorse, and demonstrated change before Sophie could begin to trust Marcus again. Their reconciliation became as public as their fall, but this time, every step was authentically documented. No tests, no deceptions. The story of their marriage became a cautionary tale about trust, integrity, and the true meaning of loyalty. Sophie's new blog, Rebuilding Trust, became a space for genuine discussions about marriage, forgiveness, and the price of deception. But more importantly, it became a testament to the power of genuine character, something no amount of money could buy or fake. The final post on her original blog remained pinned at the top, serving as a reminder that while money can be deceptive, true character always reveals itself in how we treat others, especially when we think no one is watching. Marcus learned that in testing his wife's loyalty, he had failed his own test of character, but in the years that followed, as he worked to rebuild their relationship, he discovered what Sophie had known all along, that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the authenticity of our connections and the integrity of our choices. Their daughter Faith grew up understanding that her mother's handmade blanket, still preserved from those days, represented something more valuable than any luxury her father's wealth could buy. It represented the truth that character, once proven, is worth more than all the tests in the world.